All right, we're going to talk today about Pascal's wager, a brief section from the course reader. I thought I'd start on this board by contrasting different ways that philosophers have approached the question of God's existence and using reason to try to prove it. So we previously, in the previous course, read Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. A couple of important points to note about those. They are proofs that always begin with experience. You remember, certainly if you took my class, every one of Aquinas' 5 ways starts with an observation about the way the world is. We observe in the world that some things are in motion, or that some things are contingent, or that some things act for the best system. Aquinas then applies metaphysical principles and reasoning to those facts about the world. But one of his premises is always a factual premise about the way the world happens to be. We live in a world in which things are in motion, things are changing, things are contingent, etc. And then he reasons forward from that to the conclusion that there must be, because of the way the world is, there must be some being outside of the world to whom those same principles do not apply. There must be an uncaused cause. There must be a source of motion which is not itself in motion or changing. There must be a necessary being that is not itself contingent. There must be a being that is the ground of its own being. We won't walk through those proofs again, but these proofs are all what philosophers call a posteriori, meaning they begin in experience, they begin with observations about the world. Descartes' proof of God, which we've been over much more recently, begins with ideas, precisely because Descartes has disregarded all of his senses, all of his bodily knowledge, everything that came to him in any way through his senses or his body, he has set aside temporarily in his thought experiment, and he's left with his innate idea of God. And from this, he reasons that God must exist as the cause of this innate idea. There's no other possible cause for it. We go through the 3 classes of ideas, we rule it out, it's not adventitious, it's not caused by me, it must be innate, and the idea is of such a character, it has such a perfection to it, that it must have a perfect being as its cause. Notice that makes no appeal to experience, which is why philosophers would call it an a priori proof, a proof that is prior to experience. It doesn't require any sort of observation about the way the world is, because this level of reasoning about God is prior to any experience we have of the way the world is. Now, Descartes thinks the value of this proof is that this type of proof holds even if I'm totally mistaken about the rest of the world. Even if all my senses are globally deceiving me, I can still believe, just reasoning from the fact of my existence and the existence of this innate idea in my mind, I can come to the conclusion that God exists. This was his reason for saying that I am more certain of the truth that God exists than I am certain of any other truth about my body or any kind of sense knowledge that I have. He's setting the bar very high for the importance of this knowledge. We come to Pascal, though, who's writing just a generation or half a generation after Descartes. He's reacting to Descartes. He doesn't think that the Cartesian rationalist approach, still very heavy into metaphysics and this a priori argument, he doesn't think this is the right way to do philosophy, and he doesn't think this is the right way to think about God. And so we get, at the beginning of the wager, the assertion that reason cannot determine the question of God's existence for us. Not in the way that Pascal wishes. Not enough to motivate belief and a change of behavior or reform of life. So we get instead a probabilistic style of reasoning. We get Pascal reasoning about risk versus reward, about the possible upsides and the possible downsides of believing or not believing in God in a situation where it's impossible to know for certain whether God exists or not. So Pascal begins by denying what Descartes thinks he's done, which is to prove with absolute certainty, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God exists. Pascal says, let's work from a situation where we don't know, and let's think the way that gamblers think. Because this is exactly what gamblers do all the time. Not knowing which way the dice will come out, or what slot the ball in the roulette wheel will land in, I have to make a calculated wager based upon my knowledge, my expectations of what's going to happen. I can count cards, I can figure out how many cards, how many face cards are left in the shoe. I can adjust my wager according to that. That kind of rationality is what Pascal is drawing on now with his wager. not the kind of metaphysical reasoning that Descartes uses in a priori style, and not the kind of metaphysical reasoning that Aquinas uses in his a posteriori style, beginning with observations about the world. Instead, he gives us a probabilistic reasoning which gives us reasons for belief, but not absolute proof. Precisely because we can't have an absolute proof that Pascal thinks that the appropriate way to approach the question of God is with this probabilistic wager. So we'll take a look at the reasoning structure of the wager, the logical structure of it. We'll ask whether it's persuasive, and we'll ask what assumptions are loaded into this wager, what assumptions about the human person, and assumptions about the character of rationality and philosophy.